Actually, I am kind of curious. I haven't watched a Vars video in a long time, and he did just post a tier list. Can't be that bad, right?
Hey guys, welcome back to another Genshin.
Oh my god, he said guys. Alright, before we get into any of this, let's understand that there is always going to be subjectivity involved in tier listing. Take a look at a character like Faruzan, for example. Very powerful for dog shit characters. How does that compare to, say, Ino, who's a pretty dog shit character that is actually used for good team? If you look at usage rate, I wouldn't be surprised if Ino is more popular than Faruzan. I guess this specific Abyss has the Anemo buff, so maybe not. How much value you attribute to the different factors that make up how good a character can be is subjective. Can't really get an objective metric for it that is going to accurately portray how good the character is. So keep that in mind and be kind. Yes? Yes. Okay.
Now, in light of me covering every single character, and also because I did get quite a few people saying I spent too much time talking about characters that really don't matter.
True. There are a lot of characters that really don't matter. Farina. We're gonna skip to the end, which is what you should always do when you look at tier lists. Skip the justification, skip to the end, look at the end results, and then get upset at things you disagree with. That's how tier listing works. I'm looking at it. I'm looking at the top right now. Okay. I mean, just looking at the first two tiers, this is pretty solid, you know? Okay, let's look at the bottom now. A bit less in agreement with some of the things at the bottom, but the thing is, like, with the bottom tier characters, it's like, how do you rank a character like Aoife, whose synergistic team is inherently a wheelchair team? As much as I would disagree with him being that low, I definitely understand why you'd put him there, and I don't think it's unreasonable. Kachina's too high, though. But that is what it is. You know, look at the first two and then the bottom two. Like, this isn't too bad. You know, I think the cryo characters are a little bit weird because we've had so few 4-star cryo characters that you look at characters like Rosaria, characters like Kaya. I think you could pretty reasonably make an argument for them being up to, like, this tier or even this tier. Just because if you don't have Escafie, you don't have Zjaef, which are obviously better, you don't really have a middle ground. Like, what the fuck else are you gonna do for your cryo? You don't have Lynette equivalents, basically, for cryo. Like, they haven't been releasing a bunch of cryo characters to fulfill similar roles to the, like, 1.0 cryo characters, the same way they did with Sucrose. And it leaves you with a very lopsided power level when it comes to cryo supports, where, like, they're, like, either Escafie or they're Kaya. And it's like, yeah, the gap between the two is big, but because there's nothing in between, I think characters like Kaya, characters like Rosaria, you can make a very good argument to have them a bit higher just because, well, they're still pretty decent in those teams, and, like, it is what it is. Or would you put Linnea at the top for sure? Let's engage with it past just the does it look reasonable and talk about the things I disagree with. I think Zabai is I would probably put in the highest tier. I think Linnea too. I think Zjaef as well, and Escafie. Is that true? Maybe not. Probably. See, Lali is really weird because Genshin has moved away from characters relying on specific application for their reactions a lot. And nowadays, it's pretty much just the melt teams that care about speed of application. And a lot of Zjaef's power is locked behind how she's a dedicated buffer for, like, freeze and melt, but she's obviously a lot better for melt. So she's basically just a melt character. A lot of the value she provides is the cryo application to allow you to melt. And if you just look at the value of her buff compared to characters that are just dedicated buffers, that she's obviously not that impressive. Mawika combos nerfed Zjaef? Yes and no. People finding the optimized versions of Zjaef combos helped her, and the Rosaria versions of Mawika Melt can't really do any better combos because Rosaria application is so awful. You don't have any extra cryo to work with. I love Linny, but I'm pretty sure Arlecchino is better. Is she one whole tier better? So this tier list is clearly not in, like, ordered within the tiers. Like, you can tell Shawars was released after Bennett, Mawika was released after Shawars, Eonson was released after Mawika, Inefa was released after Eonson. Like, you can tell they're in release order. Come on. We can use our heads here. Thoughts on the Molani placement? Where is she? I think you could put Molani in here and it would still be reasonable. Because again, right, it depends on how much you value ease of play. I do think that if Molani is this low, Mawika should be down by 1. Molani is harder to get good results out of than Mawika, but if Molani loses that value because of the difficulty of getting results out of her, most people also don't get the full value out of Mawika. And the lunar characters are so much easier to get close to the full value out of. What if you assumed optimal gameplay for everyone? Even if you say optimal gameplay, that's still vague. Because, like, does optimal gameplay include leaving your game open for 13 hours to extend Mawika burst duration? Does it include unlocking your FPS so that Skirk attacks faster? Does it include frame perfect cancels across every rotation? Does it assume 0 ping? Even if you're literally fucking Genshin Jesus, if you're playing on 50 ping, you'll have less DPS than a Genshin Jesus on 0 ping. Sino and Wanderer in the same tier as Child is hilarious. I mean, I don't know. The thing about that is, like, you look at, like, current day strong Sino teams, you're either looking at Omega wheelchair teams or teams that are just not that impressive. But the thing about Sino is that his kit is not one of a character that was designed to represent a low portion of your team's DPS. He's clearly a hyper carry in his kit design. He doesn't function as a hyper carry because his numbers suck. Child, on the other hand, has a kit that was clearly always designed to be part of teams where he's not necessarily the majority of the team's DPS. How much power are you attributing to Sino or to Child based on the power of their wheelchair teams and their synergy with wheelchair stuff? And that is a subjective judgment to make. I would agree that Wanderer and Sino are probably better than Child. I also don't think Wanderer or Sino should really be on the same tier as Xiao, Hu Tao, Ayaka, Raiden. I guess I don't think they're a full tier above. So I think it makes sense for them to be in the same one. Does Seatlali deserve her spot? At the end of the day, when you look at characters like Seatlali, their power is multiplicative with the strength of the carries in the archetype. If Mawika didn't exist, the best Seatlali team would be like Melt Arlecchino, which is significantly worse than Mawika. Or maybe Gaming. Skirk? Yeah, I guess it would be Skirk. Skirk or Arlecchino are like would be somewhat similar. But like the point I'm making here is characters that are purely there for support, their power is dictated by how strong the archetype is, how strong the carries are. That's why characters like Faruzan, despite providing so much, aren't that present in the meta, right? Because like in order to play Faruzan, you'd have to be playing fucking Xiao or Wanderer. Or I guess nowadays you see Faruzan because of the Venti buffs and because Mandragora is a Venti boss. And that's it, really. Faruzan is why they don't make any new only Anemo DPS. I mean, no, that's not why. They don't make any new Anemo only DPS, not because they're actively not making them, but because Anemo is a cool element that lends itself easily to interesting kit designs that can play around with multiple elements because of the element's identity. It's not that they can't do it because of Faruzan, it's that they aren't doing it because it's less fun and more boring. Now, sure, there is something to be said about how it's kind of still boring if the only viable Varka team is Pyro Varka, but that's a conversation for another day. Did Shilonen really fall off? Yes and no. So the thing about Shilonen is, like, she was never a character that was, like, all that meaningful to her teams. She was basically, like, at least a side grade in pretty much every team when she came out, if you didn't need the grouping, which you kind of didn't, right? Grouping has come back a little bit recently because of the Venti buffs. I don't know how long it'll stay actually relevant in Stygian. Maybe they'll keep it relevant, maybe they won't. Kind of hope they do, honestly. Groupable content generally has some really cool tech for it, right? Like the Sugo's fall damage shit is really nice. I think that's very healthy for the game, and I hope they keep shit like that. It's frustrating to bash your head against a wall for 3 hours trying to clear, but I do think it's... Anyways. What was the question again? I got distracted. Shilonen, right. You look at the characters that were released before Shilonen and what the like strong characters were is like Molani, Arlecchino, to some extent Cloen, Neuvillette, Lenny, and Hyperbloom. But if you're dismissing Hyperbloom because you're assuming like, okay, let's only think about what people that care about the meta for a long time and want to hyper invest into strong teams will do. So sure, no Hyperbloom. You're basically looking at Lenny, Arlecchino, Cloen, Molani, and Neuvillette. And what you'll notice is that Shilonen can work pretty well with all of them. Arlecchino's reaction teams have a problem, which is that VV uptime can kind of suck ass. So one of the main reasons why back when Arlecchino was released, one of the best Hydra units to use with her was Candace. Candace having lower field time, and Candace C6 by the way, so you get the actual Hydra. But Candace having lower field time allowed you to not only have shorter rotations, but also get through the shit you needed to do with her faster, which let you swap to Arlecchino with more time left on your VV, on your EM buff or damage buff with Sucrose or Kazuha. But Candace feels pretty awful to play. Characters that don't have a lot of hits, that are reliant on a fav proc for their ER requirements to be even possible to reach, even build full ER, aren't fun. That shit feels ass. While you had ways to work around it, those ways were locked behind Candace C6 and still kind of uncomfortable to play. And so Shilonen added a lot of quality of life to those archetypes. Sure, they weren't better than the Chivalrous teams, but they were close. At some levels of investment, they could be better because of the melt stuff. Shilonen was just pretty good for Nebula. Yeah, no real caveats there. Linny, similar thing. Linny uptime could be kind of annoying to deal with, and also his last slot options were often they ended up being Xiangling because there wasn't another good buffer for him. And that was still pretty solid, but obviously, especially if you're looking at like R1 Linny, fucking top 0.1% artifact, the value of characters like Xiangling goes down. But Shilonen was pretty good with it. Clorent, which had those aggravate teams. While her best aggravate teams, even when Shilonen came out, I think were still the Sucrose Kirara ones. Bro, that shit is fake as hell. Or maybe it was Kazuha Kirara, I don't know. Fuck the Chlorine teams that use that, alright? And just getting your Electro Swirls in general with aggravate. Yeah, like, and there was the Nahida ones, right, where getting your your Electro Swirls were fucking awful. Like, there were reliable setups. One, sometimes they didn't work in AoE because official Electro App sometimes hit the wrong enemy, and then you would have your one Electro App on one enemy and the next on the other enemy, and then you wouldn't actually end up with an underlying whatever. There were a lot of potential issues, is the point. And it made it feel awkward, and it made it obviously harder to play. Sure, Shilonen wasn't necessarily an upgrade to the Chlorine teams, but she was basically a side grade with a massive boost to quality of life. And then Molani, where she was, I would say, pretty... Molani teams always feel awful to play. The less layers of bullshit you have to go through, the better. And at least with Shilonen, you had a healer, even if it wasn't a great healer for Molani. So, like, when Shilonen came out, she wasn't really, like, a major upgrade to any team, but she was incredibly versatile. The problem is really what came after, where, yeah, she was good for Mawika. Eon-san came out and was just better than her. And if you look at the other stuff released after, you have Chaska, can't really use her. You have Veressa, doesn't like using her at all. You have Skirk, can't use her at all. You have Flenzy Nefa, technically usable, but Sucrose is so good that unless you've got fucking C6R5 Shilonen, it's kind of worse than just using Sucrose. And because they started, I mean, we watched the flip video yesterday, right? They started giving those dedicated supports defensive utility. Flins doesn't need the defensive utility the same way that Molani might. And then obviously Nefer can't use her. Zabai can use her, but I mean, especially with Linnea's release, we can see, like, it doesn't work anymore. Triple Geo Shilonen doesn't shred resistance, and Varka can't use her. So, like, when Shilonen came out, she was a relatively versatile, mostly side grade to slight upgrade type of character. But because of the way the meta shaped up since, because so many characters just don't like her in their teams, I do think she's lost a lot of value. That versatility kind of isn't all that versatile anymore. Like, she's still a good unit. She's still nice to have. How much do I use her nowadays? The main reason I use her nowadays is because I don't have two Eon Suns, and I'm a Veressa main. So if I want to play Mawika, I'm gonna have to do a team without Eon Sun if I want to play Mawika and Veressa at the same time. And honestly, unless I'm playing Skirk, I think I'd rather default to double Cryo with Escoffier now over using Shilonen. So I think that for me, I actually don't use her that much anymore. Is C6 Eon Sun better than C0 Shilonen? Yeah. For Mawika and also as a whole, I would say yeah, pretty definitely. She's good for high resistance enemies. The thing about that is, like, she is, but I don't think she's as good as you think. The gap between her and Eon-san for Mawika, for example, is actually big enough that even with a bit of extra resistance, like 50-ish, it's still very similar to Eon-san. It kind of has to be, like, even a higher reses than that. And at that point, maybe you shouldn't be playing the Mawika team in that content anyway. Everybody is a fraud to you. Farina, Shiloden, Kazuha, everybody. Bro, you cannot have 3,000 fucking Bennett's and Eon-san. I mean, oh no. How dare you emphasize that you don't need to pull for every character? I get what you're saying, but I feel like you're getting upset at something because you don't understand the purpose of the statement. I think it's actually pretty important to push back against narratives of characters being fucking Genshin Jesus when they're not. Because if you want to keep up with the meta, and you pull for someone because you hear a lot of good things about them, and it doesn't actually end up helping you that much because you kind of got misled, you already had other things that worked, you're gonna have less primos now. And if there's a character you want to get, because they actually are that good, or just because you like them. If you don't have enough primos, now you're gonna have to spend money to get them. And that sucks. Can we hear your unbiased opinion on Veressa's strength? Veressa's strength is like carried by how good her banners have been. Like no glaze, no nothing. Veressa's a pretty decent character. A lot less nowadays though with the lunar stuff, right? Lunar releases have given Veressa a fucking massive run for her money. But honestly, a lot of the value of Veressa is just how good her banners have been. Like to the point where I was actually considering maybe getting Shilonen on the J account just because that banner was so good, right? She's really good if you have all of her premium supports. Yeah, post Nog Cry, I don't think she's like all that worth going for anymore. The chat never clear fearless with Veressa and C0 Yon San, where they're acting like she's not a character without C6. Well, it's not that she's not a character without C6, is that she's like, with C0 Eon San, she's like Linny, and with C6 Eon San, she's like almost Mawika. It's a big ass fucking difference. I'm saying Eon San and Shavar. If we're cost maxing this, my 4 cost C2R1 Veressa is 200k plus damage. You can expect that from 4 cost Nogcry teams. I mean, that's not even necessarily true anymore. 4 cost Zabai solos that shit. Trust me, it's gonna eclipse that 200k mark. Like, the biggest issue with Veressa is that her, like, the C4 cons for her team are really good. C1 is ass, but her C2 is like okay. But like if you get 4-star cons without going for the C2, the value of the C2 is so much lower, right? A lot of the value of the C2 is the fact that you're getting Eonsan and Shavressa C6 on the way. All right, like you said, your C2R1 Veressa is at 200k. My C0 or my C1, which is basically C0 because the C1 is fucking dog shit, Veressa with Lost Prayers is at 173. All right, like I'd probably be at around 160, 155, 160 with C0. What does C1 do? It buffs her passive that makes her plunges do more damage after an E. Usually it's 50% motion value on the normal E and 180 on the enhanced E. With C1, it's 180 on every E, and it also applies to the mini burst. But Veressa's motion values in general are so high across the board that it's like percentage-wise, not that big of an increase. 8-ish%, if I remember correctly. Is an 8 normal for a C1? Yeah. Oh, there's a lot of, like, relatively C1s. But it's not 8 team DPS, 8 personal DPS. I think it's a bit less than that, actually. Anyways, the point I'm getting at here is, like, if you have Eonsan and Shavar's cons already, getting cons on Veressa is probably way less impactful than getting cons on the non-cry units, for example. Is Veressa premium team stronger than Binefa Wheelchair? Yeah. I don't think it is if you have C0 Eonsan and C0 Shavar's though. Maybe. It's probably pretty close. Is C6 Eonsan a bigger upgrade than C6 Shavar's? Yeah. The buff from C6 Shavar's is bigger, but in most Veressa teams, C2 Eonsan buff runs out before you're done with your rotation. And then it's not just that you don't have the extra 25% and the extra like 120 flat attack, it's also that you lose the 690 and the 30% attack from Eonsan C2 because the burst runs out. Alright, Veressa is the sort of character that, like, when her last rerun came around pre the most recent wave of Nogcry bullshit, was like, in a vacuum, pretty okay. Not quite on the same level as characters like Skirk, but not that far behind. Potentially more appealing to new accounts because of the way the team building worked, because of the one cost reality, and because the great characters for her were on her banner already. Or in order for that to be true, like, now it needs to stay the case that, you know, if you want to just get a new character starting from not having a team basically and have a like relatively functional team, that Veressa is still a very strong contender. And like, is that the case when Zabai was released and has like a relatively similar result for like non-Columbina stuff? Zabai also has the upside of, if you want to go for more, she gets way stronger, unlike Veressa. So I don't know if that's, I don't think it's still, like, I think my evaluation of Veressa's value for newer accounts went down a lot with Zabai's release.